Hello and welcome. Today I would like to share with you all the birth story of our sixth baby, Miss Vada Nicole. Oh, my talking has woken the baby. Hold on, she'll join us. Hello. It's so nice to see you. How was your nap? Oh goodness, we got to get your hair on your face. This is Miss Vada Nicole. She was born back in November, so she's over 5 months old now, but we are just now getting around to filming this. I've put off actually filming this because I filmed my other kids' birth stories just to kind of have a record and something to look back on. And I've kind of put off filming hers because we had a lot going on right after she was born, like with her and just the postpartum period and nursing and feeding and all that. And I wasn't really sure how I felt also about my birth. But the farther out I am from it and the more I reflect on it and the more I kind of talk about it with the people that were present, I'm actually kind of pissed. If we're being honest, I'm actually kind of pissed. And then I didn't know if I wanted to talk about that while I was still in that space, but I don't think I'll ever not be in that space, and I think that's okay. So I'm just going to jump into it and tell you about the day that this little blessing came to us. You ready? Okay, let's go. So, Miss Vada was due to arrive the day after Thanksgiving, which would have been the 24th of November. And I kept saying that I would like it if she came out before because I really wanted to eat Thanksgiving dinner and enjoy a big meal, and not have to like worry about whether or not that meal would be interrupted by little Miss trying to make her debut. So backstory, my other children, my first child, she was born in the hospital and she was 10 days prior to her estimated due date. And my son, my first son, was also born in the hospital. He was born on his due date, but he was an induction. They broke my water. I had been in like prodromal labor and just a lot of circumstances. Anyway, so he was an induction. And then my third and fourth babies also, hi, another boy and a girl. Oh, hold on. Let's get you settled. Okay, she's hungry when she's waking up for her naps. So my third and fourth babies were my second son and my second daughter were home births. And they came, hold on, I can do this, 9 and 8 days prior to their due dates. So I kind of thought, okay, well, here we go. Now, my next son, my fifth baby, he's a pandemic baby. And he was an unassisted home birth. And I didn't go into labor with him until the day after my due date. So naturally I was like, well, okay, here we go. He threw a wrench in it. So I thought surely he was an exception, and I was expecting fully to go into labor with her prior to her due date. That is not the case. I for sure started labor the day, well, maybe the night of my due date. No, hold on. Yes, the night of my due date. I told my husband, I was joking around, and I said, well, I'm going to let you get a couple hours of sleep. I won't go into labor till like 3 a.m. because it was like midnight when we went to bed. Anyway, so a brief backstory. I was actually supposed to be induced with her the Thursday prior to Thanksgiving, and then it got moved to the Monday prior, and at that point it was only like 4 days before my due date. I really didn't want to be induced anyway. There was not really any reason for it. Like the reason that they wanted to induce me was because I had gestational diabetes. I was diagnosed with her with gestational diabetes when I was like 28 weeks pregnant, somewhere around there. I can't remember the exact timing. I could if I looked it up probably, but anyway, doesn't matter. I had gestational diabetes. So I started seeing a maternal fetal medicine specialist because at this point I'm now high risk because I'm advanced maternal age, which is code for over 35. Like, we're never old when we're 35 unless we're trying to have a baby, and then all of a sudden it's, oh. Anyway, I digress. So I was advanced maternal age, and then I have hypothyroidism, which is neither here nor there because I had an endocrinologist, but I had gestational diabetes. So I started seeing the maternal fetal medicine doctors over at the university, and I would go in there and they did growth scans to check on her size, because one of the concerns with gestational diabetes babies is that they could be overweight, because the way that gestational diabetes affects the baby is that your blood sugar is elevated. And so your body produces more insulin to bring your blood sugar down, but insulin doesn't cross the placenta. So she gets all the sugar from you, but none of the insulin. So then her body is working to produce more insulin, and insulin is a fat storing hormone, and it can cause significant weight gain in the babies. But then also once they're born, if your blood sugar has remained high, then they have too much insulin, but all of a sudden they're not getting all the sugar. And so they get hypoglycemic and they have really low blood sugars. It can cause just a number of complications, respiratory suppression, breathing problems, just general issues at birth. So anyway, all of this to say, we were managing my gestational diabetes. I took my blood sugar before and after every meal. I managed it entirely with diet. I was almost always within range. There were a few exceptions, like when we had been camping and stuff and I wanted, a muffin or a donut or whatever. But for the most part, I would say 98% of the time, my blood sugar was 100% controlled. I took insulin overnight, not necessarily because my numbers were super high, but because the doctors wanted my fasting number to be lower than it was. It was hanging around like 97, 98. But they wanted it down closer to 90. And so I took insulin overnight just to keep the fasting number down. Otherwise, it was all well controlled. My weight gain was good. Her growth scans were good. Everything looked good. So there was really no reason to induce, except for that on paper it said I had gestational diabetes, and they like to induce by 39 weeks, whatever. Fast forward to the day I'm supposed to go in, I didn't show up. I was actually having like prodromal labor, and I was like, they called and were like, "Oh, are you coming?" And I said, "No, I'm actually having contractions. I think I'm in early labor, so I'm just going to wait it out at home and I'll come in when it's time." Well, nothing happened and it petered out. They called back the next day and said, "Hey, you never came in." I said, "Yeah, it wasn't really labor." And they were like, "Okay, well, we can get you back on the schedule." I was like, I'm actually good. I'm not really comfortable with, the induction techniques and things like that. So I'm just going to wait it out and talk to my doctor on Friday or whatever. So fast forward to Friday night. I hadn't talked to my doctor because at that point I didn't want to call them and be like, "Hey, what do you want to do?" Because they have to deliver the baby if we show up, right? Like there's no option. And I didn't really want the lecture. So we went to bed about almost 3 o'clock on the dot. Like I told my husband, I said, "I'm going to let you sleep for 3 hours." And I did. 3 o'clock, I had a contraction and I knew, I was like, this one's different, because I'd gone to bed with like some mild cramping and just like not prodromal labor symptoms. It was like, this is actual labor. And I woke up at 3 and I had a not painful, but an intense contraction. I could tell that it was different. It had shifted. It was something not what had previously been happening. And so I timed contractions and I was having them consistently. I was laying down about every 15 minutes or so, 12 to 15 minutes. So eventually I woke my husband up and I was like, "Hey babe, like it's time, we're gonna have a baby today." We got up at probably, I'm guessing on timeline here now, like 5-ish o'clock or so. Got out of bed, went into the living room, made a cup of coffee. I got on my birth ball because Henry was still sleeping in our room. At the time he was 3, but he was still sleeping in our room and I didn't want to wake him up unless I absolutely had to. Everybody else in the house was sleeping. And so we just kind of piddled around and I labored in the living room. I had texted my friend Ashley because she was coming over and we were planning to go to the hospital. I had waffled on whether or not I was going to just have her at home unassisted or if I was going to go to the hospital. Ultimately, I decided to go to the hospital because at the time, in that moment, I did not feel mentally and emotionally strong enough for various reasons to take on the responsibility of her birth. Had I had a little more confidence in myself or thought it through a little bit more, I probably would have stayed home, but I didn't. And so we were preparing to go to the hospital. I got in contact with Ashley and she was like, "Well, just keep me posted." So logistics and everything worked out to where she ended up coming over about 8 o'clock. in the morning. And at that point, like my contractions, some of them were 7 minutes apart, and then they were back to 15, and then, 9, and then 20. And so they weren't super regular, but they were consistently still coming. And I was convinced that it was still labor because it had some bloody show. And I could tell, like when I checked my cervix, that it had dilated. I didn't know exactly how far I was, but I knew that it was more open than it had been. So we just sort of meandered around the house. We spent some time in my room once Henry woke up. We spent some time on the birth ball in the living room. We walked outside on the property, up and down the driveway, did all the things. And it was never like super painful. They were just intense. And I was like, okay, things aren't super picking up, but we'll just see what happens and, hang out. And then I remember we came back into my room. I don't remember what exactly we were doing, but I remember sitting on the bed and I had a contraction, and I remember Ashley saying, okay, if this next one comes again in, what did she say? Like, I think I had several in a row, and they were either 7 or 4 minutes apart. I can't remember now. But she said if this next one comes, I think she was like 6 minutes, and then, then we should probably start heading towards the hospital. And I was like, okay. Well, the next one came, and I was like, that was not 6 minutes. She's like, no, it was like 4. We should probably go. And so we got into the van. She followed us in her car. In the time, like we got into the car, and in the time that it took us to get to the hospital, which is like 15 minutes away, maybe. I'd only had like 1 or 2 contractions. Like they had spaced back out, and I was like, come on, like seriously, I'm not playing this to get sent home or take too long game. Anyway, we got to the parking lot and started walking into the building, and then I feel like they picked right back up. They were probably 4 or 5 minutes apart. We got to labor and delivery, and it was 12:30. Man, I should have like re-vetted this information before I started sharing it. It was 12:30-ish. We have a picture with the clock there. And I just remember getting up to labor and delivery, and I was like, I'm contracting. They're pretty close. We're going to do this thing. They checked us in pretty quickly, got us into a suite. They called the doctor at some point. So I remember getting there, and I told them, I don't want to be in the bed. I do not want to be sitting down. I don't want to be on my back. I don't want to do any of those things. I told them they could go ahead and do an IV access, a saline lock in case they needed access for something. They tried to draw labs, but they couldn't get any blood out of the IV at that point. So they actually were sending the lab back, a phlebotomist back to do a blood draw. And it was actually funny because she didn't make it in time. She didn't make it up until right after Vada was born to do my blood draw. So they didn't have the preliminary labs that they wanted. Anyway, so we got checked in, and I'm in my gown, and she's like, okay, we're going to put in the saline, and we're going to put you on the monitor for a few minutes to check on her and see how she's doing. And then after that, you can go ahead and get up and move around. And I was like, okay, cool, great. That sounds fantastic. They were asking me questions like, do you want drugs? I was like, no, we're not doing that. Well, we need you to sign this form because we give Pitocin afterwards just as a routine to prevent hemorrhaging. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. That's not something that I'm going to do. And so I had to sign a form saying that I were releasing them of whatever, saying I was taking the placenta home. And then also the refusal for Pitocin or whatever. Or maybe I didn't sign a form for that. Maybe I just told the doctor I wasn't doing it. I don't remember. The point is, they then were like, well, the doctor's probably gonna want to break your water. What did they say? She's contracting good and baby is low, but she's not applied to the cervix is what they said. And right after they said that, I had like the mother of all contractions. She was like, I'll show you applied. Let's get this show on the road. Anyway, I was up in the bed. They had the monitor on me. No sooner than it had been 15 minutes maybe of monitoring, and I was kind of over it. And the doctor shows up and he's like, well, you need to do the Pitocin. I said, I'm not going to do it. And he goes, well, with higher parity, which means birth. And I'm like, dude, I know, I get you have to explain things, but I know what multiple parity means. This is my 6th live birth. I know what I'm doing. Sorry, child is interruptus. Yes. So he had tried to tell me that I needed the Pitocin because I was at risk of hemorrhaging. And I was like, I haven't ever hemorrhaged with any of my other kids. The last 3 were born at home. The last one completely unassisted. And I've never needed Pitocin or had any issues with blood loss or anything like that. And he's like, okay, well, we'll see. But because you're not doing the Pitocin, I'm going to have to manually clear clots from your cervix after she's born to make sure you don't hemorrhage. And I was like, okay, if I'm bleeding heavily, like, I guess, whatever, you know. And I was just at that point, like, they're asking me questions and I'm contracting and I'm like, dude, I don't, whatever. And then I just remember them being like, well, you know, we'd like to break your water. And I remember one of the nurses saying before the doctor even got there, well, if we call him now, he might have to wait around. And I literally was like, well, if he has to wait, he has to wait. Like, I'm sorry to be an inconvenience. They broke my water because I was just like, whatever. Like, I knew she was coming. I'd done this before and I was like, she's going to come out in a minute anyway. Like, whatever, break my water. So my water is broken and I'm having contractions. And literally, I'm not kidding you, this doctor broke my water and then he left. And I was like, where's he going? And she's like, oh, he'll be back in a little bit to check on you. And I was like, well, the baby's going to be here any minute. And I told the nurse, I said, it feels like she's crowning. And she's like, well, you're not. You're like, I just checked you, you're not crowning. I was like, I don't know what you're checking, but she's crowning. I was on the bed still. I remember the nurse was pushing the monitor in because they'd broken my water. And I should have known this. Like, I did know this, I guess, but like, they never said anything to me, which is actually what's the most enraging, because a first-time mom wouldn't know these things. Like, she'd have no way to know these things unless she was told that if they break your water, you are then on continuous monitoring, which, by the way, actually isn't always the case, because they broke my water with my second child, with my son. And then after they broke my water, I went and got in a birth tub with no monitoring and hung out and labored and then came back and I was never on a monitor. So that's actually, I guess maybe not even on me, right? They broke my water. He walked out of the room. I said I was crowning. I was on my side and I was still laying on the bed. She's still ramming this monitor trying to find the baby's heartbeat. And I slapped the nurse's hand and I was like, that hurts. And she's like, the contractions. I'm like, no, the monitor. Like, how much longer do you have to do that for? She's like, until she's born, we have to keep you on the monitor. I was like, well, that would have been great news to like share ahead of that. Anyway, so I'm in pain because she's doing this. And I slapped her a good couple of times, like, stop touching me, get away from me. I told them that I felt like I was crowning and they said, no, you're probably not. And then they went to check and she's like, oh, okay. Are you pushing on purpose? Like, no, it's involuntary. It's called a fetal ejection reflex. Like, the baby's coming out. I told you the baby was going to come out. Anyway, so then they're trying to get me to lay on my back because they want me to shuffle down to the end of the bed and put my feet up in the stirrup so they can break down the bed and the doctor can be right there and he can catch the baby like they do in the movies. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Yeah, buddy. Okay, can you go out, please? So I was like, well, this isn't movies and I'm not going down there. And my husband said after the fact, he's like, they were panicked. Like, they didn't know what to do. So they were like shuffling around and the doctor's like, we need you to scoot down. And my husband, bless him, he looked at me, he goes, do you want to scoot down or roll over? I said, no, I'm not getting on my back. I'm not doing that. And he looked at the doctor just deadpan. He goes, she's not doing that. Like, he was advocating for me the whole time. I was like, I'm not doing that again. And he's like, nope, sorry, that's not what we're doing today. Y'all just need to like adjust. I don't know what to tell you. That's not what we're doing. Anyway, they're all panicking. And at that point, Tim was like, I mean, just get out of the way. I'll catch the baby myself. Because the doctor's like, well, we need to figure out an angle to be able to support the baby. And I'm like, she's going to be like 8 pounds. Like, what? Use your hand. Like, what's the problem? So they end up just taking the whole end off the bed and so they can get up in there and support her or whatever. From the second she started to crown, the doctor like had his hands on her and was holding her and manipulating her and trying to turn her in this way or that way. She was out in like very few pushes. She had her cord wrapped around once, I think. He unwrapped it. It was no big deal. Handed the baby to me. I was like, no, I had told him I wanted to delay cord clamping until I had delivered the placenta. So we sat for a few minutes, and it never takes me long to deliver the placentas anyway, but it was probably 5 minutes or so, and maybe not even that long. Sorry, I have a ghost toddler in here who thinks he's funny. So I started to feel crampy, and like it was time to deliver the placenta a little bit, but it wasn't like, So anyway, I was like, okay, well, we can try. I started to push a little bit, and I just remember like them wrenching down on my uterus, the doctor putting traction on the placenta to get it out, delivered the placenta. Sometime before that, I think the lab tech had come back to draw blood, and so they finally got a blood draw and got labs. So they got their like baseline, I guess, labs drawn. The placenta was delivered. They put it in a bucket for us because we were taking it home and keeping it. Tim cut the cord. And then like the nurses, I just remember like my friend was trying to take pictures, and this nurse was all up in my shit. This nurse was all up in my face, like aggressively rubbing her with the blanket and like, you know, wiping her off and just like all up in our business. They took her over. They asked, you know, can we take her over to get a weight and whatever. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. You know, they want to do their APGARs, get the weight. They went over there with, my husband was with her the whole time. He did not leave her side. And, you know, then the doctor at that point is manually clearing my clots, like literally stuffing his entire hand inside of my body, putting his hand inside of my uterus to clear clots so that I don't bleed, which like there was nothing there for him to clear. Like, I don't know what, it was absurd. He was absolutely, with confidence, I can say, he was punishing me for not listening to him and taking the Pitocin like he thought that I should. And, you know, so he did that, and okay, well, you know, there's not a lot of clotting right now, but we'll just have to monitor your labs very carefully to make sure you don't need any blood, or you're not, you know, anemic or anything or whatever. Like, he was just, his name was Dr. Boner, but I called him Dr. Butthole because he was just like, good old boy, traditional, little lady doesn't know what she's saying, you're gonna do this the way I say you do it. And when I didn't, he was just a butthole about it. Like, he was a butthole about it. Her birth was very uncomplicated, very textbook. She came out, she was crying and screaming. Her APGARs were like 9s. She was fine. They tested her blood sugar. It was, they needed to be above 40. It was well above that, with 44, 45 or something like that. They tested it again a few hours later. It was still fine. She was good from the get-go. Like, everything went textbook. She was healthy. I was healthy. We were all fine. But the way, like, the doctor manhandled her to get her out of the birth canal, and the way the nurses were just aggressively, like, wiping all the vernix off, like, oh, we have to make sure this baby's not gross. And I'm like, so I literally told the nurse like 4 times. I was like, can I have her back? Are you done now? Can you bring my baby back? Like, what are you doing? Bring my baby back. And finally my husband was like, okay, just give me the damn baby. Like, what are you doing? It was so much. But in the end, you know, we delivered a happy, healthy, very sweet, very squishy cheeked 8-pound, 12-ounce baby. She was, I think, 21 inches long. I'm going to have to double check that, maybe 20 inches. And I'll share a picture of her here. This is when she was born. She's so cute. She wasn't latching great in the hospital. It was like very short. She'd pop on and pop off. But I thought that was just kind of normal, and they never really evaluated it. That's a whole other story for a whole other time. The complications that arose after her birth as a result of her birth, and all of the handsiness and stuff causing just insane amounts of tension and lack of mobility for her, was sort of disastrous. So if you want to hear about that story, that's going to come up next, and I'm happy to share that with you. But here she is, little Miss Vada Nicole. She is happy and healthy and the smiliest, most vibrant baby. She's always grinning from ear to ear, unless she's hungry, and then she'd get mad. Girlfriend knows what she wants. But yeah, she's just a blessing. We're just so grateful for her after you know, a traumatic couple of years and losses, and just praying that if it was God's will for us to have another baby, and then getting Miss Vada, it's perfect. She is named after my great-grandma, Vada, and her middle name, Nicole, is after my best friend and her auntie, Ashley. Yeah, we just love her. We adore her, and we can't wait to see what she grows into. She's already such a perfect part of this family, and we just love having her. So thank you so much if you listened this far to Miss Vada's birth story. I know that it sounds very angry, and I do have a beautiful baby that came out of it, But I think it's important to share the bad and the good. I've had hospital births, I've had home births, and I used to say, well, not all hospital births are bad, and I don't necessarily believe that hospital births are bad. There's a time and a place for them. There is absolutely a time and a place. I think that the medical system is broken, and I think that the way that we treat birth and view birth and birthing mothers and pregnancy is broken, and I think that that is all just contributing to so many other issues. Birth trauma and birth disappointment is real. It's a real thing. It doesn't mean that we're not grateful for what we have. It doesn't mean that we're not thankful that our baby is here and happy and healthy. And a happy, healthy baby is the most important thing, but it's not the only important thing. It's not the important thing, as people will tell you. It's the most important thing, but it's not the only important thing. So it is what it is. We are here. We are happy. As I said, we're healthy. And sweet Miss Vada just brings us joy every day. And we just spend our time bonding and delighting in her. So thank you so much for joining us for this story. I hope it wasn't too long. And we will see you back again soon. If you want to hear about our breastfeeding journey and Vada's very hard fought victory in that arena, I'll be sharing that with you next. So stay tuned. Have a good day.